especially with people's view of poetry and spoken word, producer does not come into it much other than at most producing the big event, the big festival kind of thing. So for you, what does producing mean when it comes to poetry and spoken word and this kind of art scene?
Yeah, I think producing is something I really struggled with defining for a very long time because, I came from a self-producing background, and I think many poets self-produce but wouldn't ever call it producing. And I think for me, producing just is anything that accommodates the creative process or the creation of a new piece of work, or a night or somewhere where art takes place. And that includes the admin, but it also includes the kind of emotional work you do to make that happen, and the kind of keeping people happy and keeping people in a place where they can make art. So all of that work that is not the actual creative work that goes into making art happen.
And for you, how valuable is it to have a producer or be producing work in poetry wise? Is it more a case of like, if you're taking it seriously, you need a producer, or should it be a thing that generally people should be thinking about almost regardless?
No, I think it's hard to say because it doesn't have a very structured place within performance poetry at the moment. And so I don't think looking for a producer is really a thing that happens that much, and shouldn't necessarily. I think it's good to think of the work you do yourself to make your work happen, and have it find stages and other things to do with it. I think it's good to define that as producing work you're doing. And when it gets to a point where you feel like your work has outgrown the stages you can reach with it, or the people you can reach with it, or when you feel overwhelmed by the admin side of things that you have to do, or you are in need of some guidance on that, I think that's the point where it's good to go talk to people about producing and maybe look into that. But there really aren't that many poets that, as just poets, have producers. It'll usually be around, if you're doing a longer piece, like an hour-long piece or something, or just looking at bigger projects or festivals and stuff like that, where you find producers. And I think it should kind of stay that way, because in a way, there's a lot to learn as a poet, and it's good to do a lot of that work originally yourself and really understand what you want and need, and what you can do and what you can't do yourself. And keeping it kind of grassroots, I guess, is really important to me as well. So I'm very minimalistic about producing poetry.
So I don't quite need to get a producer for my open mics I'm going to and stuff like that yet.
Well, you might, Tyrone, but most people probably not.
Well, then, focusing in then on your experience of producing, how has producing been for you? What has been your personal experience of producing?
Yeah, I started producing my shows that I did with friends. So it's me and 3 other friends. We did a couple shows together and really enjoyed that. And obviously, to write a show is one thing, but then to get it somewhere and perform it in front of people is another. And I kind of started realizing at some point that I was doing a lot of work to do that because I really enjoy it. So I was taking on a lot of that work with help from the others, obviously. And at some point I went, I really actually enjoy doing this, so maybe I can do more with it. And from that point, kind of started taking on more, and then got a couple opportunities here and there that I was quite lucky with, and then rolled into kind of finding funding for pieces we wanted to do, shows we wanted to write and put on. And it's been a really, really steep learning curve, not coming from a theatre background where producing, is such a common thing, and not really having a mentor or anyone to tell me what to do for a very long time, and trying to figure it out. And that was really, really hard. But it also helped me really focus on what I think a producer should be for poetry. Obviously, there are poetry producers in the UK, more so in England than in Scotland. And it's now really good to see everyone have their own individual way of doing that. And I've made my own individual way. And for me, that a lot of that focuses on accessibility and diversity, and kind of really making space for different things and different kinds of work and interesting work, and helping people kind of make the best of what they want to do instead of what I want them to do. I guess it's quite important to separate those out.
Well, then, kind of almost building on that, then obviously you haven't necessarily done any theatre producing in that sense, but nevertheless, from looking at your spoken word producing to looking over and seeing almost like across the hall, looking at the theatre producers and whatnot, what have been your main differences, things you've noticed that don't apply to spoken word, and things you need to be aware of when you're doing spoken word? Oh, this will just apply to here.
I think scale is a very big one. Spoken word, just, there are maybe like 3 people in the UK who do poetry on a scale that would be comparable to most theatre that happens. Um, it's always going to be a fringe affair, kind of, that you do, and that's good. That's fine. I think that's actually quite fun. It gives you a lot of space to make weird stuff and keep it weird and keep it poetry instead of having to make it more theater to appeal to more people. So scale is a big one, and then another one is background poetry, performance poetry. It's a grassroots thing. Most people start at open mics, apart from a couple of different like places you can go, like in London you have Roundhouse and other places that you can go to like learn more about it, but most people just go to events and open mics and perform and get better somehow. I don't know how we do it, and learn that way. And so we all have our own backgrounds, and we all have our own things we're good at, things we're not as good at, and there's really not a mold for poetry or being a poet, and it's really about making your own platform and your own audience and finding that and finding what you want to be doing. Some people might want to go more towards theater, some people might want to go more towards music. It doesn't have to be more towards anything really, but it is easier to really reach into places that already have established physical buildings and platforms and all that. So I think a big difference there is the individuality of each project and each person that you work with, and just knowing that no one has the kind of formal background that you find a lot in theater and other more established art forms. And that, I think that's great. I think it opens it up to a lot more different people, but it does mean in terms of finding funding, it can be really hard to convince people that you're good at what you do when they don't know you and they don't know your art form and they don't really know what to do with you. So it's just, as a producer especially, I think becoming really good at convincing people that you know what you're doing.
I remember I had to, I don't want to say bluff once, but there was a few years back when the Roundhouse had a producers roundtable meeting for like a couple of actors as well, and they invited a few producers down there, and they asked me to be on that panel for them, and it's like, I'll do it, but also like, I'm not a producer, but I can bluff it enough. But like with that, like I've got experience of like hosting nights, and there was some level of producing to that. So for you, it's been more shows and things like that. And obviously, again, what's more been the difference between like producing a full-on show versus producing just like a monthly night or a regular night in that sense?
Very different. I think a lot of poetry nights, a lot of effort goes into them, and I don't want to in any way say it doesn't, but it does. The nice thing about it is there's communities around them usually, and especially the longer running ones, there's people that come. You do some social media, you make sure there's poets, and you make sure everyone feels good, and you safeguard that, and that's the important part of that. And that's it. Not that that's not a lot of work, it is, but when it comes to then doing shows and trying to find new audiences and people to come to see your show, so we mostly do hour-long kind of more theatrical shows that are still very much performance poetry, but also fit within theaters. So we are trying to put performance poetry into theaters, and then having people come to see that, and suddenly having to fill, 100-seater theater, it's a different thing. And so you have to work with the theaters who have all these things in place that we don't really know about as poets necessarily. You have to work with all the different people, the technical department, tech. I know how to work a microphone, but that's about it. Now I know more, but that was all, I had to learn that at some point. And the other side of it is it's a lot of press and working with press people, media people, and that is again sort of a very different thing. It can feel really detached compared to the kind of immediate response and thing you get from poetry, where you show up and you do your thing and people enjoy it, or they don't enjoy it, but hopefully they won't tell you that. And so it feels like you're kind of removing a bit of yourself from it, but actually if you do it right and work with artists who are keen on really expressing what they want and finding, reaching audiences and thinking about that, how to do that, then that can be quite a good way of really narrowing down what it is you're doing and what you want people to get from that. So there's just a lot more steps to the outcome that can feel quite daunting and can feel quite tough to get through if you're used to showing up and doing your thing.
No, that's nice. And I guess now to almost bring this kind of section to a close, I suppose, I guess it would be almost remiss not to talk about the good things you are doing. So what are the things you've been working on producing wise recently that you're happy about, or things you can work on in the future that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I was doing a lot before, lockdown happened. My biggest project at the moment is a show with a Scottish poet named Ellen Renton, who is also a really good friend of mine. I've done shows with her before where we worked together as artists, and this is the first time I have produced a show that she is doing on her own. It's her first solo show. It's called Within Sight, and it's about disability and running and the Paralympics and kind of the social model of disability and the pressure that people with disabilities experience from society to be kind of this superhuman, superhero type person instead of just getting to live a life and be happy, and capitalism and all that plays into that. And Ellen wrote a beautiful, wonderful show, and it has like multimedia elements, and we got funding to tour that through Scotland, which unfortunately had to be called off after the first couple shows, which is a shame, but we'll be coming back whenever that is possible. That was kind of my main project. That's now unfortunately on hold. I also, in a show called Makeshift with Ross McFarlane, who's the other person I primarily work with, also a Scottish poet. And that recently came out online, which is fun to do after we toured it last year through the UK and Ireland as well. To be able to put stuff online and have more people be able to see it has been really great. And that's kind of a millennial queer short show. And then I'm doing my first kids show, which is not poetry, which is really fun and intriguing to do an actual theater show, I guess. And I'm trying to now move into kind of things for now that we've moved online so much and there's so many measures in place and we don't quite know when anything's going to be back on. I'm really trying to respond to that in kind of thoughtful ways and think about accessibility and who can see what. And I don't know, I have plans for a traveling theater to do like personal shows for people, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, kind of trying to be really, responsive to what's happening in a sort of way, keeping in mind that a lot of access stuff will disappear and a lot of people that were kind of getting into stuff and early career people will not get the same opportunities, and kind of trying to make those opportunities still happen.